In an amazing show-not-tell tale, The Wheel of Time's fourth episode reveals the Aiel's ancient past. Robert Jordan's story has been completely flipped by The Wheel of Time Season 3, which sends Rand al'Thor to the Aiel Waste before he travels to the Stone of Tyr. He seems to have made the right decision because the wise ones of the Aiel inform him that if he hadn't approached them first, he would not have survived his conflicts with the Dark One and the Forsaken. Rand has to go into Rhuidean as the Dragon Reborn. He can have visions of the past by passing through the glass columns of Rhuidean, an old Turingriel that was made by an Aes Sedai a long time ago. Any Aiel will undergo a transformation as a result of this encounter since it gives them a glimpse of their people's disgraceful beginnings from the perspective of their ancestors. This is a clever use of showing, not telling in narrative terms, exposing mysteries of the ancient past through visual representation. What did we discover then? A pacifist group known as the Tinkers, who adhered to an antiquated philosophy known as the Way of the Leaf, was introduced in earlier seasons of The Wheel of the Time. This prohibits the use of force and violence and is modeled after the peaceful fall of a leaf. Rand discovers that the ancient Aiel were soil dwellers who adhered to the Way of the Leaf as he passes through the glass columns. Lews Therin led them, though it should be mentioned that he doesn't appear to have personally adhered to the Way of the Leaf. By the way, this is the reason the Aiel are called the People of the Dragon. It's because they followed the first dragon, Lews Therin himself, not because they were destined to follow Rand al'Thor. Nevertheless, it is evident that their outcomes are still tied to Rand's. The Aes Sedai gave the Aiel a seed of Avendezera, the legendary Tree of Life, almost 3,000 years ago. In response, the Aiel went to the Aiel Waste to build a city where they would plant the sapling and took an oath to always follow the Way of the Leaf. Unfortunately, the adversities of the voyage were too much for the Aiel, who progressively abandoned pacifism and strayed from their oath. In order to explain to viewers why the Aiel violated their oath, the Wheel of Time goes to considerable measures. Generations passed during their journey, but because they were pacifist and their numbers were steadily declining as a result of bandit attacks, they were unable to defend themselves. These prehistoric Aiel grew to despise the Way of the Leaf and were repulsed by people who chose to die rather than defend themselves against harm. After settling in the hostile Aiel Waste, the Aiel further deteriorated into a violent and vicious species. The Aes Sedai, Latra, who had sent them on their quest generations earlier, approached them as they started to construct their own city, Rhuidean. Because any Aiel who walked between the columns would discover the shame of their past, she created the glass columns of Rhuidean as a judgment on them. Because they were unable to cope with the humiliating reality, the Aiel fled and abandoned the city of Rhuidean. The only Aiel who had been given this knowledge were their leaders and wise ones. They would demonstrate their worth by going into Rhuidean, moving between the columns, getting the visions and learning the truth. Only a third of the Aiel survive the experience, indicating that it is too much for them. In grief, Rand saw an Aiel who had physically ripped his eyes out. The Wheel of Time explores the history of the Aiel through the use of glass columns, but Moiraine's significant remarks also provide a wealth of additional information. She discloses that her people at Carrion were given another Avendezera sapling by the Aiel centuries ago. Originally intended to be a symbol of peace, Moiraine's uncle felled the tree to gain an irreplaceable throne after ascending to the throne. The Aiel War started for this reason and ended only when Moiraine's uncle was killed on the slopes of Dragon Mount by Rand's own father, Janduin. As was already evident in earlier flashbacks, Rand's mother lost her life in the conflict, but Tam al'Thor abducted her newborn child. Rand's tale is finished, and he at last comprehends both his own and the Aiel's origins. The Kare Karn. What is it? In addition to being the Dragon Reborn, Rand al'Thor is also the Kare Karn, whose arrival was predicted by Latra Sedai in the so-called Prophecy of Rhuidean. The Chief of Chiefs will bring the dispersed Aiel tribes back together and make them cooperate at last. He will eventually fight alongside him in the last battle after leading the people of the dragon out of the Aiel Waste and into battle at the Stone of Tyr. The Aiel will be redeemed in this way, but they will also be destroyed. Rand's fulfillment of the Kare Karn prophecy is already evident. He was raised in the West, far from the people of the dragon, despite having Aiel ancestry. He is more of a stranger who shares their blood than anything else. He is not really one of them because he does not understand their ways. The most concerning thing for the Aiel is that he now knows the secret of their past, which, if known to everyone, would destroy them. When they violated an oath, the Aiel as we know them were born. They must now take an additional oath of loyalty to the Dragon Reborn in order to be saved. By sending Rand to the Aiel Waste before he visits the Stone of Tyr, The Wheel of Time Season 4 has completely flipped Robert Jordan's story on its head, and it is certain that things will continue to unfold in a very different way.